Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here and make sure that you can access it even after the fact. We have a podcast channel on YouTube. Go to YouTube and search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And, of course, I also encourage you to visit the Virginia Institute for Public Policy and all of our work, the Tuesday morning group coalition meetings, and all of the other things you can be involved in our little do tank here. A great group that has branched into so many things, but you could just spend days tooling through what's going on at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, including their work with Right on Crime and so much else. But their educational angle for this week's program is where we're going, especially as we're getting into graduation season and we start discussing what comes next in our schools. Dr. Thomas Lindsay is on with us. He is the Senior Fellow for Higher Education and Constitutional Studies at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thank you for joining us this weekend, Dr. Lindsay. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, Joe.
Not at all. And thank you for doing what you're doing now. Your work is specifically, and you've just written a piece about reviving American civics. And we've brought this up. I went to the New York City public schools in the 70s when not only was the school district bankrupt, but so was the city that we were living in. And I feel like I'm overqualified to talk about civics these days. Why have we left civics in the dust? Is it for the obvious reason that it benefits those in Washington and Richmond in our case?
Well, I think what happened is back in the 60s, there was a movement to increase educational quote-unquote relevance and a student-centered curriculum, which all sounds like good stuff. Mm-hmm. But what it meant in practice in the colleges, and of course the colleges teach the K-12 teachers, so what they do in college, the K-12 kids will be instructed in. Mm-hmm. They abandoned a required core curriculum in the liberal arts and sciences, including the required study of Western civilization and American government. One example, Hamilton College, named after Alexander Hamilton in upstate New York. You can be a history major and get a history degree there without taking one course in American history. You have to take a number of courses in non-Western history.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh my
gosh. That's what we're up against.
Well, and how can we be a self-governing country if we don't understand the responsibilities that come along with rights? And of course, that leads into the crazy world where we're not worried about free speech rights as much as we are in the imaginary right of having an apartment or a car or a job or at least an income.
No, that's right. We are, Alexis de Tocqueville, the political philosopher who wrote Democracy in America, he said that the danger to American democracy was that citizens would come in time to trade their liberty for security. Mm-hmm. And of course, as Benjamin Franklin said, when you do that, you end up with neither. Yeah,
and you deserve it as well.
That's right.
So tell me about what Action Civics is and how this is coming to bear in getting our kids back into the idea of right and wrong and freedom versus tyranny.
Yeah, unfortunately, Action Civics has turned out to be in practice a Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. I would ask your readers to look up an article by Robert Pondisio, who an acknowledged left-wing teacher. And he said, I have written about Action Civics, I taught it, I practiced it, but I'm done with it. And he says, the reason I'm done with it is because all it turns into is teaching kids how to protest in favor of left-wing causes.
Wow.
That's Action Civics. And my colleague and I here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Lucy Meckler, we wrote a piece last fall in which we exposed all this. Subsequently, they are using a different term now. They're calling it experiential learning.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Just as in Illinois, when people started to sniff out that critical race theory is in fact racism itself, mm-hmm. They changed the name to culturally responsive teaching. This is what they do.
Well, and I've raised 3 children, and I understand going down an aisle of a grocery store and the kids see something they want and they protest for it. I've been on the receiving end of those protests. But responsibility means the young people, as they reach adulthood, have to be shown that they can't just get what they want. And maybe this is why we have a society that seems to have mistaken preferential treatment for justice.
That's exactly right. That's a good point. And that's also Pondicio's point. The title of his piece, if your readers want to just go in and Google it, is Kids as Political Props.
Oh, gosh.
And what he said it produces is unintelligent, uninformed kids who nonetheless have a profound sense of entitlement.
I guess the defenders of such a teaching style or curriculum would say, well, we're not telling them what to protest for.
Yeah.
They could very easily protest for school choice and right to life just as easily. Why does it always seem to wind up to be Marxist causes, left-wing causes that get the protest marches and not the conservative individualist causes?
Because they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Lucy Meckler and I, our study, we went to one of the leaders in Action Civics, Generation Citizen. We went to their website because they say we're nonpartisan. Mm-hmm, we're nonpartisan. Mm-hmm. And we looked at their action. We looked at the first 35 Action Civics projects. The overwhelming majority of them were all protesting in favor of left-wing causes.
And of course, when you say somebody should speak up, the defenders will immediately point to the civil rights marches of the 60s. Sure. And here on the radio, I'll hear people complain that we're anti-protest and we have a protest culture. I said Dr. King was protesting to get the government to stop doing things.
That's right. That's exactly right. And Dr. King wasn't 11 years old when he did it.
Right.
Right? So, of course, kids can do whatever they want. It's a free country. But the point is, teachers, especially teachers who are paid for and directed by taxpayers, cannot use their classroom as political indoctrination centers.
We've seen this frequently. Dr. Thomas Lindsay is on with us, Senior Fellow of Higher Education and Constitutional Studies at Texas Public Policy Foundation. TexasPolicy.com is their website. We've seen this frequently here in Virginia, the annual Dog and Pony Show, where the school budget will be presented to the local supervisors for approval with a healthy tax increase and a big budget increase. And usually our school divisions are anywhere between 50 and 70% of a county's budget, depending on the county. And if any supervisor dares to question why they're up 5-10% in their funding requests, you'll see a line of children lining up all in coordinated T-shirts and saying,
"That's right.
Our favorite teacher is going to be fired because of this." And, of course, that makes the evening news. And did they learn this then, or is this just an offshoot of the same protest that they figured, we can get more money doing this. What else can we do with little children?
Sure. No, that's right. Look, I testify before the Texas legislature. I've been doing it for the last 10 years. And when they get kids in there on any issue, they go gaga over them. Melt. So the kids are being used. I mean, that's why Pondicio's title is Kids as Political Props. Right? The kids aren't learning about the fundamental moral, political, and philosophic principles that explain the writing of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Instead, they're all hot about some issue the teacher has identified, and then they go there. In fact, in Pondicio's article, he talks about an incident with which some of your listeners may be familiar. This was a few years ago. They took a class of little kids to Senator Dianne Feinstein's office, and they just started harassing her, and Feinstein said, "Do you guys even have any idea how a bill becomes law?" Which is supposed to be what you learn in civics first and foremost.
Yeah.
No, they didn't. All they knew was they wanted something, and they were going to yell, which of course, I'm not criticizing them. They're kids.
Right.
I'm criticizing the adults who manipulated them.
Is there a case to be made for child abuse or some sort of CPS ordinance that could be brought against these school teachers for behaving in this way?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I do know that if our bill that we've been supporting here in the Texas legislature, if it passes, teachers will no longer be able either to teach or to receive training in any doctrines that advance notions of racial superiority or inferiority, of sexual stereotyping or scapegoating, or of racial scapegoating.
Is there and we were just talking to our previous guest, said there's a perilous tightrope you walk when you walk down that road, and you have to very carefully write legislation addressing this, because the left has shown a great ability to take a bill like that and then turn it on the conservative principle anyway.
That's right.
So tell us about the bill that you have before the Texas legislature, Dr. Lindsay.
Yes, I mean, this bill does two things. First, it requires of all Texas students that while they can study other things, that they study the Declaration, the Constitution, Federalist Essays 10 and 51, which are the two most famous and most important essays for understanding the American Constitution. We also had put in there excerpts from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. That got stripped out in the House debate. The bill still has to be decided in the Senate. That got stripped out because people took a couple of statements of Alexis de Tocqueville's out of context and said he's a racist. Mm-hmm. Nobody said, because nobody knew, because our civic education system is so bad, nobody said, wait a second, Alexis de Tocqueville was an abolitionist.
But he's a racist abolitionist.
So he's gone, right? He was taken out.
But that's the scary world we're living in right now. Yes. I had a conversation just earlier this week. We were talking about some of this critical race theory. I've debated Dr. Kendi on CBS television, and
have you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Within minutes, I realized this was just reverse racism, not anti-racism. And spent an hour trying to make my case with 13 other Charlottesvilleans arguing against me because he had a PhD and it was his show, I guess. But that being said, you're looking at a world where I had somebody come up to me and say Thomas Jefferson he could prove that Jefferson was a racist because he wouldn't use Locke's actual quote regarding life, liberty, and property because he knew that it was racist to own slaves. I said, yes, but what you miss is the entire edited declaration that included one of the most elegant rebukes of the business of slavery. So maybe Jefferson's failing was he wasn't a good legislator and he couldn't get that kept in, but he wrote perhaps one of the best rebukes of slavery ever.
You are so right. And unfortunately today, students don't know that there was a first draft of the Declaration, as you just said, written by Jefferson. And the last charge, the list of grievances following good rhetorical procedure, you start with the least and you go to the worst.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You don't start, if you're prosecuting a guy, you don't say he murdered, he kidnapped, and he jaywalked. Right? You go the other way around.
Yes, exactly.
So that's what Jefferson does. And the last charge, the most serious charge, he says, quote, King George III has waged cruel war on human nature itself, enslaving men, and he puts men in capital letters. So if anybody has any question about whether African Americans are included in all men are created equal, look at Jefferson's first draft. Now, it's clear to everybody the South wouldn't have joined in the Revolutionary War if that had stayed in. That's why it got knocked out. And then if the South hadn't joined, remember, we were fighting a country that at the time was the most powerful country in the world, Great Britain.
Yep.
We'd have never won and not only would we not have won the Revolutionary War, not one single slave would have been freed.
Ever. And that's the thing they forget. And then the British went immediately to work on the South after the Revolution to start trying to teeter them away. And I say, not only played a role, obviously, in 1812, but I think they played a very, malicious role in the Civil War as well.
It's a good point. That's right. Well, Lincoln the Americans captured a British ship. And the British said, you better give that back or we're going to fight you. And Lincoln said, this is the middle of Civil War, so Lincoln said to his cabinet, one war at a time, and we gave the ship back.
That's right. It was so are we in a world now, Dr. Lindsay, where after COVID, and our previous guest, Kerry McDonald, was saying, the percentage of parents that are homeschooling is up to the same number as put them in parochial schools. Support for school choice, money follows the student, is upwards of 70%. Are we at a perilous place where these school divisions are maybe pushing all their chips into the middle of the poker table, saying this is our last hand, we better try to get it now because the parents are, pardon the phrase, #woke?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good analysis because I do think that that's what's happening. It may well turn out, I mean, the Texas Public Policy Foundation was established in 1989 on one issue, school choice.
Mm-hmm.
It may well turn out that critical race theory is the best advertisement for school choice that could have ever been developed.
Well, if you think about what you're saying with the action civics and then critical race theory on top of it, you're telling students to protest themselves. You're telling little white kids that they're bad based on their color of their skin, which, pardon me, sounds like what we were doing 100 years ago to the black kids.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And, the Chinese American Citizens Alliance has come out very strong against critical race theory. You may have seen in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago, they call Asian Americans the new Jews, and by that they mean this. In the 20s and 30s, the Ivy League colleges in our country had a quota for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have a quota for Asian Americans.
Yeah, and now, I don't know if you've seen this or not. This is right off the newswire. Black Lives Matter has taken the side of Hamas in the battle in the Middle East ongoing right now, and saying they're standing with their oppressed brothers in Hamas. So you see where these racial battle lines are being drawn, and any of my friends who say Black Lives Matter isn't a terrorist organization, that may well be here in the United States, but they certainly have taken side with one of the most ardent terrorist organizations in the world.
They are guilty at the least of giving aid and comfort.
Yeah. So this is what we're teaching our kids.
Yeah. Joe, let me have your audience think about this question. Is anybody aware of any country in the history of the world that compelled its citizens to support, through their tax dollars, teaching their own children to hate their own country?
Until now, I can't think of one.
Nor can I. But I think you and I both know it doesn't end well.
Well, and it's maybe that's the intention, is they want it to not end well. They want to raise a generation that is built on this. But let me follow through on this because I talk to a lot of 20-somethings, my kids, friends, and everything, and they seem to get the hypocrisy of this. So, aside from the 11-year-olds, does this organization, does this mindset have a coalition, or do they have to work on 11-year-olds who are just looking for the approval of the grown-ups?
Yeah, it's hard to know because, the polling is showing here millennials, the majority embrace socialism. So I think that this woke education, of which parents are just becoming aware now,
Mm-hmm.
It's been going on.
Yeah.
It's been going on for a while, and we're starting to see the bitter fruits of this.
Well, I had a debate with somebody about capitalism, and I said, so who's Adam Smith? And he said to me, wasn't he the quarterback of the Washington football team? And I said, no, that's Alex Smith, and I walked away because he was telling me how bad capitalism was, and my argument was, kid, we haven't seen capitalism, real free market capitalism, in my lifetime almost.
Exactly. And the other side of the coin, they know nothing about the reality in practice of every experiment in communism that the world has ever seen. They know nothing about it. It's not their fault. They're not taught it.
I talk about this, and as soon as they started ripping into President Trump, I said there's a bigger issue here than just President Trump. I said, they're trying to send a message to anyone that might want to run for Virginia House of Delegates, Virginia governor, and all the way down to the school board. Don't be outside of the orthodoxy of the left right now, because we will put your address on the internet. We'll call you a racist. We'll put white sheets on your car. We'll key your car. We'll assault your family.
You'll get fired from your job.
Yep, you'll get fired from your job. So we have no school board members, and I can't find any. I know a lot of conservatives. I know a lot of conservative educators. Says, please run for school board. Nope, not putting my name out there, because they don't want to be the ones that take this kind of hit. What do we? And that's the part of this battle that really daunts me, Dr. Lindsay, is how do we change this? Because these school administrators are running along with a blank check.
They really are. And, I when I speak on this subject, parents always ask, what can we do? And first thing, if you recognize that we're in a war, then you've got two alternatives. You can either fight or you can surrender. Mm-hmm. And if you surrender, you're surrendering everything good and beautiful about this country, and you are condemning your children and your grandchildren to servitude.
Without question, when you look at what they're doing with the defund the police, which I think is an abject for defund private property ownership protections,
exactly.
And from there on down. Dr. Lindsay, thank you so much. It's TexasPolicy.com, and you guys do sanctified work there. And thank you so much for joining us this weekend on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Joe.
And for all of you, again, VirginiaInstitute.org. I'm Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.